You are watching Fugitive Red Eye, and welcome to another Go Nagai video. Yes, that's right, I'm finally getting back to Go Nagai content. And not only that, but we're back to a proper review. It's been so long since I've done a proper new review of Go Nagai content, so finally here we are, and today we'll be talking about the Abashiri family manga. Now, this is a manga that introduced several characters that would become staples in Go Nagai's future works, particularly Naojiro. However, many of the other characters would also be reused, as Go Nagai likes to have many callbacks. I also have that shared universe theory I made forever ago that I still think stands, and like I said, I consider this to be pretty early on in that timeline. I said it was the beginning. There's some characters that were in other stuff that were later brought into this, so, you know, it gets kind of complicated when you get into the minutiae of it with Go Nagai stuff, but this is one of his earlier works, and it's really fun. I really enjoy this one. I watched the anime quite some time ago, which was only 4 OVA episodes, and it was only based on one arc of the manga, with the first episode having nothing to do with that arc and being entirely made up for the anime. Now, the manga had a total of 15 volumes, for a total of around 50 chapters. Now, they're numbered at 49 on the app I used, but there's also a chapter 0. It originally ended with the chapter before last, and then there was another chapter that they made later. The series started in 1969 and ended in 1973. So it's one of his earlier on works, but it ended the same year that Violence Jack started. I will be doing comparisons to the anime throughout this, so just be aware of that, but, for instance, the anime adapts the Paradise School arc of the manga, when Kikinosuke is sent off to a villain school to be trained to be a better villain. But this school has the teachers being really evil and punishing the students through violent and sexual torture means. Very similar to the concept that would be Kekko Kamen. Now, in the anime, they make it seem like this is a kind of a one-off. There's actually a few different schools that are kind of like this. There's villain schools all over in this universe. But nevertheless, we'll talk about that more when I get into the actual plot. Another thing that's interesting is the tone of the first episode of the anime is a lot more serious, but since the other 3 episodes are based on the actual manga arc, it's much more in tone with that. But even then, it's more serious than this is, because this is at its core a gag comedy. Now, there is violence, and it spans many, many genres. This thing has so many different genres that it goes over. But the Abashiri family is about a crime family called the Abashiri family, with the father Damon, oldest son Goemon, second oldest son Naojiro, only daughter, who is the second youngest child, Kikinosuke, and then the youngest, Kichiza. Now, in the anime, my favorite character was Naojiro because he's cool, he's big, he's buff, and he's a cyborg. He doesn't have a ton of prominence in the manga, I think. Like, he is there, but there's not a lot of depth to him. He's just kind of cool and, like, badass. But there's not a whole lot of chapters that are focused strictly on him. In the manga, my favorite character actually ended up being Kichiza, because in the manga, Kichiza is super based, like, he's super sexist. Constantly doing shit to get back at girls or punish teachers. He's easily the most fun character in the manga. Goemon is also really prominent in the manga, and he's a lot of fun, and we'll talk about Goemon a little bit later, because I'll tell you this, there's no way in hell this comic will ever get a Western release. There's no way in hell any publishers will ever have the balls to put a character like Goemon in a translated version. It's not gonna fucking happen. Now, in the anime, a lot of the characters had abilities that were made up, like Kichiza having clothes that explode, and Kikinosuke having this power called the 7-God Death Technique or some shit like that. That's not in the manga. There are some abilities. For instance, Damon is still telekinetic and telepathic, and Naojiro is still a cyborg, though it's not really mentioned more than, like, once. In the world of this manga, these are villains that live in a villain's world. There are police, but the police are very easily overwhelmed and taken out. The villains are so prominent in this that they have their own schools. Again, Paradise School is not a one-off. There's many villain schools in this series. They also have their own villain Olympics where they hijack the Olympics and then televise it. And there's a bunch of different gangs of villains. Really, the only way this makes sense is if this is in a post-societal collapse world where society has collapsed and crime runs rampant. That's really the only way this makes sense. That said, this is a very ludicrous and outlandish comic, so it's not supposed to really be realistic. The key difference between the anime and the manga is in the anime, they make it a big deal that Kikinosuke is a chick. None of the family was aware of it, except for Damon. Like, he concealed that from her brothers as she was growing up. That is not a plot point at all in the manga. Kikinosuke is always known from the start to be a female, and every single member of the Abashiri family is attracted to her, and there is a lot of perverted shenanigans, as you would expect with anime, especially from the era of it, especially with Go Nagai. There are some more serious and action-packed chapters, but as I said, it is very gag comedy, and there is a lot of, over-the-top absurdity. For instance, this has several different genres, like I said. There's kaiju, there's ghosts and, like, monsters and horror, there's them becoming pirates, there's sci-fi stuff, there's western, there's prison, there's all sorts of stuff that happens in this. There's sports. Like, it spans so many genres, and it's very episodic. The chapters actually vary pretty greatly in length. There's some chapters that are like 15 pages, and then there's other chapters that are like 200. It varies pretty greatly. And sometimes the story arcs have very satisfying conclusions. Other times you can tell Go Nagai just got bored of it and rushed it to an end. That is unavoidable to mention. Abashiri Family has all over the place pacing. Sometimes a story will go for multiple chapters and have a nice conclusive arc. Other times it'll end really abruptly. Sometimes it'll have a couple of chapters and then just end abruptly. Other times, it'll just be one chapter that's like 20 pages. It's really just whatever Go Nagai feels like with the arc. It's very cartoony. If you're trying to take it too seriously, it's not going to be as enjoyable. But when you realize it for what the gag comedy it is, it's one of his best works. Now, I mentioned that there's no way in hell this thing would get a US release. That comes down to Goemon in particular, for sure, but also to a lot of the other characters and scenarios. Sexual assault is a pretty common joke in this manga. I think it's fucking funny as hell. There's a lot of good jokes with it. But people nowadays would probably lose their shit how much there is with that. Goemon's entire personality is that he's literally a rapist. Like, not rape, but like he gropes chicks, he grabs them, he does all sorts of stuff, right? That's his entire personality, and he's not the only one. All the characters kind of delve into that at times, but Goemon is the most prevalent one. There's a chick that goes to Goemon's college, who is a constant victim of Goemon, and is always unfortunate. She never says no to anything because she's too polite. But even when she does, Goemon doesn't care because he's a piece of shit. So, there's a lot of that. There's quite a bit of it. Goemon even has a quote-unquote superhero alter ego called Molester Mask. Again, this would not get a Western release, I am pretty sure. If any publisher had the balls to publish this in the US, I would be shocked. But again, all of it is played for laughs, and it's not like super serious or like traumatic or anything like that. It's just like I said, this is the kind of thing that you really wouldn't see in a Western audience in this day and age especially. Yeah, many of the plots of the story involve the Abashiri family being villains and bullying the innocent around them. For instance, the very first chapter, Chapter 0, shows them move into their new house by kicking the other family out and bullying their neighbors and being total pieces of shit. Or there's chapters where Kichiza tortures his teachers to get better grades and things like that. Like I said, they are very clearly villains. But then they also try to play to the sympathetic side by having them still be a family that cares about each other. And they try to do kind of the family comedy stuff with them too, which is kind of funny given the juxtaposition of the two. There are, like, good guy characters that are portrayed as antagonists. One notable one is this chick, Hoen Daiko, who's introduced in, like, Volume 3 and 4. But then she comes back in the final chapter. She's huge. She's just a giant chick. And then that's just kind of accepted as normal in this universe. Like I said, it's very cartoony. But she gets even bigger in the final chapter. Again, what was originally the final chapter. There's actually one chapter after that. In this original final chapter, she swallows Goemon, who's trying to grope her. And then he's, like, living in her stomach, and so then it ends with her pooping him out, and then the whole family gets covered in shit. It's not exactly the most pleasant way it ends, honestly. Like, I'm not the biggest fan of the scatological. The absurd, and, like, kind of raunchy stuff in it is funny, but, like, the scatological stuff, you know, that's one thing that Go Nagai does that is very hit or miss. It was still funny. Like, it is funny that was originally supposed to be the ending, but I'm not the biggest fan of poop jokes. But then later, the actual final chapter is them hijacking a spaceship, and then Goemon getting stranded on a planet of Goemon-type aliens and being the king of the Goemon aliens. It's a series that never takes itself too seriously. There's many fourth wall breaks in it, and there's many times where Go Nagai even calls out what the hell is going on in this, where he has his little Go-chan character pop up, you know, his little chibi version of himself pop up and say what the hell is going on here, or what was the author thinking, that kind of thing. The series also, in addition to being the basis for many characters that he would reuse in later stories as callbacks, also has several crossovers. It crosses over with Harenchi Gakuen. It crosses over with Devilman. There's a cameo of Mazinger Z in it. There's many other crossovers in it. We also got the Alphon family in this, of course. There's references to Kikai-kun, which the Alphons first appeared in. I've yet to find a way to read Kikai-kun, but that does predate this one as well. But this is a really fun comedy. It's clearly one Go Nagai just had a lot of fun writing. It doesn't take itself too seriously. It's got gore, it's got nudity, and it's got some really offensive stuff. So, at the end of the day, it was right up my alley. It was a lot of fun. It's Go Nagai being Go Nagai. Like I said, I don't see this getting an official US release anytime soon. But, again, maybe that's for the better, because, again, I hate it when things I like get too normified, and then everyone just becomes a fucking loser and makes it lame. I don't like fan bases expanding too much. I do prefer them to be niche, as I've said in previous videos. But I had a lot of fun with this. It was way more entertaining than the anime. I would have liked to have seen more of the serious criminal stuff, but again, that's not what this was. And there's criticisms to be had, for sure. The pacing's all over the fucking place. And again, that is by design. And again, there's not a lot of depth to the characters. They are kind of very one-note. But again, that's fine for what it wants to be. For just being a gag comedy, I think it does it really well. Again, it's interesting to me that Naojiro actually isn't my favorite character in the manga, or even my second favorite. I think I'd place him at third in the manga. It probably goes Kichiza, Goemon, and then Naojiro. Maybe even Damon above Naojiro, because I really like Damon in the manga as well. But Naojiro is cool. I do like that he is just kind of the strong, silent type. And he's very, like, stoic in comparison to the others, because he still has his moments, and all of them are perverts. But yeah, Abashiri Family was a whole hell of a lot of fun. Absolutely loved it. Very good Go Nagai comic. I hope you enjoyed this review. This has been Fugitive Red Eye. Have a good one. Toodles.
Subscribe to Fugitive Red Eye.